Hello, welcome to the channel and thanks for watching. And this is full on oldhammer time. If you've watched my channel for a while, you know I did a video where I had some of the very early 1990s sentinels and compared them and did some evolution moving through. Well, those sentinels were literally in a mate's loft for the last 20 years. He dug them out for this comparison video, and then as we were looking, he said, oh, there's bits missing, they've been in a bag for years, in a really sorry state. Is there anything you can do with them, mate? So I thought, right, I'll rise to the challenge, and this is what we're seeing. So this is literally how these have been kept for about 20 years in a plastic bag. There are parts missing, the paint on them is quite grim, and they're not in a very, very good state. Now, there is one with no paint on, so it's lasted this entire time unpainted. It has been painted with a mix of kind of enamels, and I really don't know what's been on these. So the first stage is to get them back to the bare metal to see what we can work with before we start working on replacement parts. So I've showed it on the channel before about how to strip paint from models. So it's very easy. Slap them into a pot, and then we're using some methylated spirits, just covering the model up, and that should start to remove the paint. Now, I do this quite a lot on relatively modern models. Never done it on lead models from the age that these are. So wore a glove with them to make sure I wasn't going to get anything on me, because when you do this with plastic models, modern ones, the paint comes off very, very quickly and easily. It was a little bit different with these. Now, part of this build to start with is going to be getting these models to pieces. When you leave the models in the kind of methylated spirits for a long time, it soaks into the gaps and cracks and can break the models down. So I was kind of relying on that happening. So first stage, it was obvious to me this was not going to be as easy to remove the paint as it is from a modern model. So a couple of gloves on to protect myself and really giving it a good scrub. Now, I'm not doing really too much pressure on this. I'm using an old toothbrush to get the paint off, because these are old lead models. You don't really want to be scraping too hard, pushing too much, giving too much pressure, because you will start to damage the models. See here, they started falling apart as I was working in some cases, and then in the sockets of this model is the residue of what I imagine is 20-odd-year-old super glue, but I think actually it might be two-part epoxy. I did pick up with him and say, how did you build these? He had no idea all those years ago, and obviously 20 years ago, the glues were different, how the models worked together were different there. So really taking my time dismantling these, using a bit of a knife to take them off, but really trying not to scrape the metal, because it's lead. It'll fall apart and damage the detail, but also it's not nice to have little flicks and bits of lead knocking around all over your gaming table. So really taking some gentle stages. It took probably a week to actually do this process, not in terms of doing it consistently, but leaving it to soak for a good sort of 10 hours, having a bit of a scrub in the morning, letting it soak again, doing a bit of a scrub on the evening after back from work. And I found that whatever the green paint was that he'd used on these models took an awfully long time to come off. I had them down to good quality metal with the silvery paint he'd used fairly quickly, so that came off relatively reasonably, but this green paint, whatever it was, I think it was some sort of real thick dirty enamel, did take quite a few goes to get to a good condition. And you can see there, even after a few soaks, that kind of gooey residue. So if you're ever going to do a rescue of models like this, what are vintage, very rare to get hold of models, take your time, because it would have been easy for me to damage them. What was fun as well, when I got down to the stage of this bare metal you can see here, I started to notice that actually, even though it's the same piece, there are quite dramatic differences on the model, both in terms of how it's cleaned up, that's because of the paint, but also in terms of the actual casting of these models. They're not the accurate pieces that we get nowadays. Then it came, once I was happy with how much paint had come off, I wasn't going to achieve perfection on all of them. It was really going back and cleaning up 20-year-old Flash. When he cleaned these models up, hadn't done the best job in terms of cleaning up, because in those days, again, you're rushing, different techniques, different technologies. So really trying to get it to the point of, I'm happy with it. No flash, no bits of debris coming through, and just generally giving them a really good clean up before we start the build process. And this really showed me how different these models were. I keep saying 20 years, but it's actually over 30 years since these were made. It was 1991 these came out. If you look at the Aquillas on the nose there, I don't know if it's picking up on the camera of it, but they are actually drastically different, which is bizarre to think. So, you've got chunks of flash on the front of one that clearly was never on the front of the other. The wings are slightly different sizes, because these are spun cast metal mouldings, done in a rubber mould. So the chances of variance is relatively high. And on the 4 models I'm looking, there wasn't one that looked like the other. So just a bit of interest. What I was also trying to do when I was building this is really get the best pieces onto the models that were going back to him to currently use. What I mean by that is I had a discussion with him as I was doing this, sort of saying, look mate, what I fancy doing is, why don't I do your platoon of 3, based up on current size bases. You can use them in your new games, and then I'll paint one up as a bit of a homage to the one that was probably the best painted. And he said, yeah, go for it. So really I was testing all the parts together to work out what fitted better, because they're all different sizes, and then thinking which are the worst parts, because I will make the homage piece that I'm going to paint into the worst sentinel. So that's what I'm putting together now. This is the worst sentinel that we're going to do. Sounds odd to build the worst one first, but it's again good idea to experiment on the one that you're not entirely fussed about if you make any mistakes, etc. So really just playing, and actually weirdly, even though this is the worst one, this is going to be the more original one, because the reason for laying all those parts out was working out how many parts I had to cast up and make fakes of to give him complete models. So this is actually the complete sentinel, gluing it together, just super glue and a bit of green stuff going into the gaps there. And the reason for the green stuff is you can put it into the socket and it just pushes any of those sort of areas where it's not moulded properly or cast properly. It'll push into those air spaces and really give you a solid sentinel build. And hopefully if anyone decides to strip the paint off it in 30 years, they're going to have a hard time, because this will not fall apart. Right, now it's time to actually make the fakes. So I've assembled the legs into one piece, and I'm doing some blue stuff casting here. I do quite a lot on the channel. I've done some videos for it, I'll link it down below. But essentially I was taking the best pieces and making them into these blue stuff molds so that I could cast up the spare parts that are needed to make the full models. So he's going to have a full unit of 3 new sentinels. So it's a good fun technique and good blue stuff casting. And I was only going to be casting actually the pilots, some of the feet, some of the guns, because that was actually missing. I thought it's a bit of a fun skills test to actually cast the whole thing up. So not really a dodgy moral line, this one, because you know they don't make this model anymore. So I thought, why not give this a go? Let's have a bit of a laugh. You'll see at the end how successful doing an entire oldhammer sentinel out of green stuff is. So here is the finished result. Again, if you want to know more detail about how to do blue stuff casting, I will link the video down below. It is a bit of fun. So I'm cleaning up the one, and I'm going to build a full sentinel out of the green stuff here. Now what I did is I cast everything 3 or 4 times to make sure I got the best quality replica parts for the models that are going to go on his final finished models, which you'll see again at the end. So keep sticking around. I realise it's quite a long video, but I thought, do you know what, this is not the sort of thing you do every day, so why not have a bit of fun with it? You can see there actually at the bottom left, that isn't parts of the sentinel, that's parts of the base I've cast, and we're going to see that in a second. So having a really good clean up of all the guns and all the feet and all the parts, you'll see the different parts I cast, and then just using the worst castings to build myself up that green stuff sentinel. I was quite pleased with how it turned out, actually. Just a bit of fun. I'm not going to do anything with it. This is still in my cabinet, green, looking like green stuff, and it's probably going to stay that way as well. Here's a point to note whenever you're building oldhammer models: look at the size difference on the actual models. The one on the left is significantly different at the top of that ball socket to the one on the right. So when you are rescuing these models, just bear that in mind, that you're not going to get perfection. Now, I quite like doing fancy bases, and I got to this point in the build and thought, you know, why not give him a base where the sentinel stood up on an ammo crate looking all dynamic and interesting. And this is something that we've talked about a few times in my sort of gaming group, how the model technology has moved on so much over the years that, you know, pretty much someone that won Golden Demon years ago, entering that same model now, it would get nowhere, just as an example. And this is one of those examples. To pose and sort of make a diorama out of the oldhammer models is radically more difficult than new models. I messed about trying to get it to stand up at a sensible angle onto this ammo crate, and in the end gave up and thought, right, I'm going to do something very different with these bases. So there you see the assembled model. I changed my mind actually when you do a talk-through video, and this footage was a while ago, and I actually put all the cast-up bits onto the one that I was going to do as the oldhammer model on a base. So apologies for that. I should go back and edit that early in the video, but I do these things in one take, so I'm not. Right, I picked up some large sentinel bases to go with these models. They looked a bit lost on the base, so I thought I'll do something different. Now, these pieces here are from a set Games Workshop did 20 odd years ago, I think it was, maybe about 20 years ago, that was Battlefield Debris. I was just going to use them and stick them on instantly, but I thought, you know what, when I bought these, I had the intention of putting them on a Warhound Titans base, and I never did. I did something different with that basing at the time, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to be buying another Titan in the new year, so let's make some fakes of these base pieces to use on here, and I'll use the originals when I buy my Titan in the new year. Really pleased with how these little basing parts came out, so I thought, right, I'll do 3 different bases. This is the one with those cast up basing pieces. I'm doing one with some inquisitorial symbols that I showed you and one with kind of event. Before I started putting anything on, test fitting the sentinels, because I've built them at slightly different angles for the feet and everything. This is just a basing paste from Vallejo paints, which I've used across my Tyranids and my new Dark Angel models from the Leviathan set, if you've seen that one. Quite a nice versatile paste. And the reason I want to use it on this base is when you get these cast up pieces, they do stand slightly proud of the base. So I wanted to give some height to the paste, so it would make these pieces sort of blend in. Also taking some of that paste and dropping it onto the cast up parts. It would have been a little bit odd if you had these perfect bits of rubble in a sea of this kind of paste stuff, so dropping it onto those cast areas. It's a real good fun thing to do, I find, when you're doing any project, is experiment with the base and try and do something a little bit different every time. Here we see the second base, and you can see the extent of some of the spare parts we've made. So there's one full sentinel you've seen there. That one there you can see with the green parts, he's got a cast up gun, a cast up actual pilot and a cast up foot. So they will blend in, is the hope, when they get to the painting stage. Here we are, so it's set. So this model is now firmly sealed onto this base. So that's detail of one base, I particularly like it. Detail of the second base with that kind of fan and a vent in there. And then the third base has got the cast up inquisitorial symbols from the Sister of Battle set. And I wanted to give him just a unit, but with some individual different bases and some he can have a bit of fun with. So, testing out my new Citadel large paint handle, not use this very often. And this is the original sort of base size you would have put it on. Now, this has got some cast up parts in here, which I hope you can't spot what they are. I think that's the point. Once you get the paint on these models and the cast up pieces, I think they do blend in really well. Now, I'm not only going to go through the colour scheme that I used here, just to say that this is just a bit of a homage to the scheme he had it in originally. And that's kind of my reward for doing this project, really. I wasn't getting paid for it, he wasn't giving me anything for it. It was just something that I thought would be a bit of fun to do for a friend, and I'm giving him back a unit of 3 that you can get, painted up and use on the battlefield. I get the joy of doing it, bit of fun, something to show on the channel, and also just have that bit of a laugh of painting and very, very old school one model. I've done a very recent video where I showed one of the old Terminator captains from the early 2000s, now going into a model from the early 90s, and it's a very different experience painting these old models. Bit of fun. So if you've got a chance, to pick up an old model from eBay and rescue it yourself and do that from this era, it is a bit of fun. But like I said at the start, just be aware that these are not the same sort of quality, standard and ease of build and use of the current vehicle models. One point to note, when you look at this model here, the legs are a bit bowed, there's some damage on them, whatever. So this is really the real cast off, not so good parts from this model. It's also a good chance really to use my bigger new paint handle. I'm going to do a video fairly shortly about painting handles and why you might want to use them, and just have a bit of fun with that. Now here's another interesting one. That pot of flock you can see there, that is 20 odd years old as well. Found it in the garage. I knew it was in there, I've just not used it for years. It's going to make it anymore. It's just a bit more fun to use something really old onto an old hammer model, and it's finishing off with some little bits of basing, tufts and things there. So that was a bit of a strange video for me, a bit of a diversion for the channel, what we're doing lately, but I just wanted to use this channel to show what I'm currently doing in the hobby. And sometimes you do some modern stuff, sometimes you'll do a little project for a friend. You can see that I've got just a one-shot picture of the models that I've then undercoated black, although it's come out grey in the photos. At some point, if he gets them painted up, which I know he's doing, I'll maybe share some of these pictures onto my Instagram and stuff. So if you're interested in how these old-timer models turned out in the full unit, keep an eye on my Instagram. Like, comment, subscribe to this YouTube channel. I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you again.